Hello, my name's Sarah. Thank you for being here and welcome. Hope you're all feeling well and had a good week. It's Friday, we're crawling through to that weekend. So, we started the Christmas Carol this week, and I hope you've been enjoying it so far. I'm very happy because the book's arrived. Better late than never. I was reading it off my phone for the first couple of times and I was squinting trying to read it. So I'm very relaxed now that I've got my book. I'm all set. Just slightly late, but we'll roll with that. Okay, so to start us off today, I thought I would throw some Christmas riddles your way. Now, I just thought that gets our brains ticking. And I know you can, well, I know that I'm not exactly sat next to you. However, if you shout out to the universe, if you shout in the wherever you are in the world, if you shout at that telly or at that phone or at that iPad, I will do my best to hear you. I really will try. And I'm very happy for you to send me your answers later and let me know how you did. Okay, so I think I will actually give you the answers though, because I know it's awful when you've got something on your brain and don't know the answer. It always comes to me when I'm like half asleep, you're lying in bed, then you're like, oh, I have an answer, but I'm not sure what it's for. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so the first riddle. If the end of the year is on December 31st, what is the end of Christmas? If the end of the year is December 31st, then what is the end of Christmas? The end of the year is on December 31st. What is the end of Christmas? Okay, I'm going to come back to answers later. Move on to the second riddle. When does Christmas come before Thanksgiving? When does Christmas come before Thanksgiving? Now remember, these aren't trivia, these are riddles, so it will be a silly answer. When does Christmas come before Thanksgiving? I'm not giving you very long on these, sorry. Number 3. 2 mums and 2 daughters went out for Christmas dinner, and each ate 1 portion. Only 3 portions were eaten in total. How is this possible? 2 mums and 2 daughters went out for Christmas dinner, and each ate 1 portion. Only 3 portions were eaten in total. How is this possible? So 2 mums, 2 daughters, out for Christmas dinner, each ate 1 portion. Only 3 portions were eaten in total. How is this possible? Okay, so that's our 3 riddles for the moment. Let me whiz through them. If the end of the year is December 31st, what is the end of Christmas? The letter S, as it's the last letter in Christmas, so comes at the end. Ugh. The letter S, as it's the last letter in Christmas, so comes at the end. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, number 2 was, when does Christmas come before Thanksgiving? When does Christmas come before Thanksgiving? Answer is in the dictionary. You're going to hate me. Number 3. 2 mums and 2 daughters went out for Christmas dinner, and each ate 1 portion. Only 3 portions were eaten in total. How is this possible? Number 3's answer was, it was a grandmother who is a mother who is a mother and a daughter who went out for dinner. It was a grandmother who is a mother who is a mother and a daughter who went out for dinner. That got me, that one. Very good. There we go. Christmas fun, forced fun for you on a Friday. I might do, you never know, I might do some more next week. Holler if you've got any ideas. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the next chapter of our book. So we are up to Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. So make sure you're comfortable and I'll get started. Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes, when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7 and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12. Then it stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct the most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, it isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro, and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had been beaten off a bright day, and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after the sight of the first exchange to pay Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge security, or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought and thought and thought it over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone to 3 quarters or more, when he remembered, on a sudden, that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could not more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long, and he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding, dong. 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding, dong. 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding, dong. 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding, dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it did now with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy one. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. Those curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge started up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthing visitor, who drew them as close to it as I am to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child, like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportions, Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its holds were uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of it using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked up at it with increasing steadiness, was not in its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what was light in one instant, at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now with a pair of legs, without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts, no outline would be visible in the dense gloom, wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What!" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? It's not enough that you are one of those passions made this cap, and forced me through trains of years to wear it low upon my brow." Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that the night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then, take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise, and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that the bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall, and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. "Good heavens!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. His gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge with fervour. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and its winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their back, who called the other boys in and shouted to one another, until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travellers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten, and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas, as they parted at crossroads, and bye-byes for their several homes? What Merry Christmas to Scrooge? What was a Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good it had ever done him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of red dull brick, with a little weathercock cemented cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and stuttered in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall, and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthly savour in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight, and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them, and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made a barer still by lines of plain deals, forms, and desks. At one of those rooms a lonely boy was reading, near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the panelling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door. No, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with softening influence, and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm, and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window, with an axe stuck in his belt, and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here alone, he did come, for the first time, just like that. Poor boy!" And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson, there they go." And what's his name who was put down in his drawers, asleep at the gate of Damascus? Don't you see him? And Sultan's groom turned upside down by the Genii. There he is upon his head. Serves him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess? To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. There's the parrot, cried Scrooge, green body and yellow tail, with a thing like lettuce growing out the top of his head. There he is! Poor Robin Crusoe had called him, when he came home after sailing around the island. Poor Robin Crusoe! Where have you been, Robin Crusoe? The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday running for his life to the little creek. Hallo-ha! Hoop hallo! Then, with the rapidity of transition, very foreign to his usual character, he said in a pity for his former self, poor boy, and cried again. I wish, Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. But it's too late now. What's the matter? Asked the spirit. Nothing, nothing, said Scrooge, nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all. The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, Let us see another Christmas. Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all of this brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck, and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. To bring you home, 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 little Fan, returned the boy. Yes, said the child, brimful of glee. Home for good and all, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night, when I was going to bed, that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you may come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man, said the child, opening her eyes, and are never to come back here, but first we're to be together all Christmas long, and have the merriest time in all the world. You are quite a woman, little Fan, exclaimed the boy. She clasped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childless eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, Bring down Master Scrooge's box there, and in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of shivering best parlour that he was ever seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine, and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administrated instalments of those dainties to the young people at the same time, sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, But if it was the same tappy as he had tasted before, he had rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied up on top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster good-bye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoar frost and snow off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, said the ghost, but she had a large heart. So she had, cried the Scrooge. You're right. I will not gainsay it, spirit. God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, Yes. Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were, it was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops, that here too it was Christmas time again. But it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door, and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it, said Scrooge. Was I apprenticed here? They went in, at sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if it had been 2 inches taller, he might have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again! Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from shoes to his organs of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer Dick! Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. Dick Wilkins, to be sure, said Scrooge to the ghost. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear. Yo-ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work to do tonight. Christmas Eve. Dick, Christmas, Ebenezer, let's have those shutters up, cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands. Before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how those 2 fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, painting like racehorses. Hilly-ho! cried the old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer! Clear away! There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would ever desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and turned like 50 stomachaches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young fellows, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having board from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next but one, who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling, in they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again, the other way round, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place. New top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All the top couples at last, and not at a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as the old fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was a cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. Okay, I know that was a bit of a mouthful for you all to listen to, but hopefully that was enjoyable. And we're going to stop there today, and we're going to continue on Monday. So have a lovely weekend, take care of yourself, and look forward to seeing you soon. Goodbye.